I was nothing more than an ordinary, impoverished student. Yet I was hired by the richest men in the city for $1 million salary. For one reason only, to serve as a personal caregiver for his daughter, Willow. And yet, everyone in the city was convinced I wouldn't last 3 days. After an accident, Willow had been left paralyzed. Not only was there almost no hope of recovery, her temper had also grown increasingly volatile. Every single person who had tried to take care of her had been driven away, frightened off by her emotional outbursts and extreme reactions. Among them were many professional medical staff and rehabilitation therapists. So it went without saying how little faith anyone had in me. A penniless young man with no experience whatsoever. But what no one expected was that I stayed with the Liu family for a full 6 months. And even helped the young miss stand up again and take her very first step. She was even willing, for my sake, to rein in her temper and endure the painful, drawn-out rehabilitation training, just when everyone in the Liu household was filled with anticipation. Believing that Willow Liu would make a complete recovery with my help, I suddenly, without hesitation, chose to resign and leave. Chapter 1. The rainstorm was like a hole had been torn open in the sky. Freezing rain slammed against the hood of my cheap trench coat, crackling loudly, so heavy it felt as though it might pin my frail body to the slick asphalt beneath my feet. I struggled to lift my head. Before me stood a massive wrought iron gate. Beyond it stretched a long, shadowy private driveway. And at its far end, faintly visible through the curtain of rain, loomed a brightly lit European-style villa, imposing and overwhelming, like a silent monster crouching in the downpour. The intercom buzzed coldly with a sharp beep. I wiped the rain from my face and leaned closer to the small metal grill, forcing my voice into a deliberately steady tone. "Hello, I'm George. I have an appointment with Mr. Liu." A moment of dead silence followed, broken only by the roar of the rain. Then came a soft click. The heavy iron gate slid open inward without a sound. I took a deep breath, air thick with rainwater and the earthy stench of mud, flooding my lungs, dragging my half-worn suitcase behind me. I stepped onto the soaked pavement. Each step sent muddy water splashing around my shoes. In front of the villa's main entrance stood a middle-aged man in a black suit, holding an umbrella. His rigid features and motionless posture made him look like a sculpture devoid of expression. "Mr. Wang." His voice was flat, utterly without inflection. I nodded. "Yes." The man shifted slightly to the side. "I'm Mr. Liu's assistant," he said. "My surname is Vargas. Please follow me. Mr. Liu and the young miss are waiting for you in the study." The interior of the villa was suddenly painfully bright. A massive crystal chandelier hung beneath the soaring ceiling, its light reflecting off the mirror-polished marble floor. Cold, dazzling, and extravagant, the air carried an almost sterile scent of cleaning agents, mingled with the smell of expensive wood and leather. My canvas sneakers left several embarrassing wet marks on the smooth floor. Instinctively, I drew my feet closer together. The wheels of my suitcase rolled across the ground, their sound echoing hollowly through the vast space. Assistant Vargas led the way without even glancing at me, guiding me down a corridor lined with abstract oil paintings. He stopped in front of a heavy, dark solid wood door. I raised my hand and knocked twice, softly. "Come in." A low, slightly weary middle-aged man's voice answered from inside. The study was enormous. An entire wall was taken up by built-in bookshelves, packed tightly with hardcover volumes. Behind a massive redwood desk sat a middle-aged man in a dark gray cashmere sweater. His temples were streaked with gray, and between his brows lingered both the authority of someone long accustomed to power and a fatigue he could not fully conceal. He was Pablo Liu, the man at the helm of the Liu Group. Pablo's sharp gaze swept over me as I stood awkwardly by the door, scrutinizing me as though he were appraising the value of a commodity. He gave a slight nod in acknowledgement, then shifted his gaze toward the space in front of the desk, off to the side. My heart sank abruptly, following his line of sight. I turned to look. Chapter 2. By the window, with its back to the doorway, a silver wheelchair stood silently. A girl sat in it. She wore soft, off-white loungewear. Long, lightly wavy chestnut hair fell loosely over her shoulders, covering most of one side of her face. Outside the window was a pitch-black rainy night. In the garden, trees were beaten by the rain until they leaned crookedly, and winding trails of water crept down the glass. She sat there without moving, like a piece of porcelain forgotten by the window, her silhouette so frail it seemed a single gust of wind could scatter it. The heater was clearly on, yet an isolating coldness seemed to radiate from her, shutting out everything around her. Pablo rose to his feet and walked toward his daughter. His voice was deliberately gentle, tinged with cautious appeasement. "Willow, Daddy found you, a new friend." "They're here." "A friend?" A sudden scoff cut through the air, cold as ice laced with poison. The girl in the wheelchair still didn't turn around. Her voice was hoarse from long disuse, edged with undisguised sharpness and irritation. "Another paid-for lapdog my father bought. Is this one meant to cheer me up, force me to eat, or, she sneered, pretend to care about my useless legs again? Every word lashed the stagnant air like a whip. The muscles in Pablo's face twitched slightly. A flicker of pain and helplessness passed through his eyes. He turned to me and handed over a thin card. George, this is your payment. His voice returned to a businessman's cool composure. 2 million. Half paid up front. The remaining half will be transferred to your account in 6 months. Regardless of Willow's condition, your job is to stay with her, take care of her daily life, and make sure she does her rehabilitation as long as she's alive, and her mood doesn't get too bad. Can you do that? My gaze fell on the smooth surface of the bank card. The cold string of numbers seemed to burn with heat. I reached out, my fingertips touching the chill of the card, and took it steadily, slipping it deep into the pocket of my washed-out jeans. There wasn't a hint of hesitation in the movement. Yes, Mr. Liu. My voice was even, betraying no emotion. Pablo seemed to relax a little, with a trace of complicated feeling. He glanced once more at his daughter's rigid back. Assistant Vargas will show you to your room. It's the guest room next to Willow's. If you need anything day to day, tell him directly. He paused, lowering his voice further. She has a bad temper. She's suffered too much. Please, be patient with her. Be patient. I rolled the words around in my mind, my gaze drifting once again to the icy outline of the wheelchair. A bad temper was inevitable, and the 1 million down payment was already in my account, with the remaining million within easy reach. For a poor student still worrying about next month's rent and losing sleep over his sister's exorbitant medical bills, this kind of patience was nothing worth mentioning. Dignity, under absolute survival pressure. It weighed less than a scrap of paper. I nodded, said nothing more, and followed Assistant Vargas out of the study, a room saturated with oppression and silent confrontation. The door closed softly behind us, sealing off the suffocating standoff between father and daughter inside. Chapter 3. Early the next morning, sunlight struggled through the narrow gaps in the heavy velvet curtains, casting a few pale beams across the expensive carpet. Holding a carefully prepared breakfast tray, warm milk, a perfectly fried sunny-side-up egg, a few slices of whole wheat bread, and a small dish of fresh fruit, I stood outside the tightly closed door of Willow Liu's bedroom. I took a deep breath, curled my fingers, and knocked lightly 3 times on the dark solid wood door. Miss Liu, breakfast is ready. There was absolute silence inside, not even the faint sound of breathing. Keeping my patience, I knocked 3 more times, using slightly more force. Miss Liu, it's time for breakfast. After that, we'll start today's rehabilitation training. Get lost. A hoarse roar suddenly burst through the door, like the howl of a wounded beast, thick with hatred and despair. Take your crap and get the hell away from me. Do you hear me? My fingers tightened slightly around the tray. I stayed silent for a few seconds, then spoke again in the same flat, restrained tone, like reciting a pre-written program. Mr. Liu instructed that your meals and rehabilitation schedule must be regular. Cold milk isn't good for your stomach. Hey! A sharp, icy laugh came from inside, followed immediately by the dull thud of something heavy smashing against the door. Bang! It sounded like glass or porcelain shattering. Then her furious voice followed. Regular, rehab, you people, every single one of you, acting all high and mighty, taking my dad's money and pretending to care. What a performance. Disgusting. Get out. If you don't leave, I'll make sure you end up more shattered than that cup. The milk glass on the tray trembled slightly. I lowered my eyes and glanced at it without expression. I pressed my lips together. I didn't try to speak again, and I didn't leave. I simply stood there, holding the tray, like a silent statue outside the door. Time ticked by, second after second. The air congealed, heavy as molten lead. After an unknown stretch, 10 minutes, maybe half an hour, the sounds inside disappeared completely, leaving behind a suffocating dead silence. I finally shifted my stiffened legs. I didn't knock again, nor did I attempt to force my way in. Holding the now cold breakfast, I turned and walked back downstairs to the kitchen, my steps steady and unhurried. I poured the milk into the sink, tossed the egg and bread into the trash, washed the fruit, and put it back into the refrigerator. Every movement was precise, meticulous, betraying not a hint of emotion. When I finished, I walked to the huge floor-to-ceiling window in the living room. Outside lay a meticulously trimmed but lifeless garden. I took out my phone and opened the banking app. On the screen, the balance was clearly displayed, 1,007,379.00 yuan. I stared at the numbers for a long time, until the screen dimmed automatically, reflecting my own blurred yet calm face. On my forehead, the small cut from yesterday, left by shards of the crystal ashtray Willow had thrown, was still covered by an inconspicuous bandage, faintly throbbing. I tugged at the corner of my mouth, forming a silent curve. Chapter 4. The rehabilitation room was filled with the sharp scent of disinfectant and a dull, oppressive atmosphere that belonged to long-term illness and pain. Outside the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, Sunlight blazed brightly, yet none of that warmth managed to penetrate the heaviness inside. Willow slumped in the cold rehabilitation chair like a beautiful doll drained of its soul. Her face was so pale it was almost translucent. Her lips were stubbornly pressed into a thin line, her gaze hollow as it fixed on some corner of the ceiling, completely ignoring the gentle guidance of the professional therapist beside her. The therapist carefully tried to lift her limp, powerless leg. It had barely bent by a tiny angle. Ah! A piercing scream suddenly tore through the room, shattering the fragile calm. Willow's body instantly went taut like a drawn bowstring. Both hands clenched the edges of the rehab chair, her knuckles turning a bluish white from the force. She snapped her head around. The emptiness in her eyes was now replaced by raging fury and overwhelming pain as she stared straight at me, the closest person to her, as if I were the very source of all her suffering. It hurts. Let go. You're hurting me. Get away. All of you. Get away from me. She shrieked hysterically, her body thrashing violently as she tried to break free from the therapist's hands. Startled, the therapist looked at me helplessly. My expression didn't change. I stepped forward, not trying to touch Willow, but positioning my body between her and the therapist in a subtle, protective barrier. I leaned down slightly. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut cleanly through Willow's cries. Miss Liu, rehabilitation hurts. Only by enduring it can your muscles have a chance to regain strength. My tone was as calm as if I were stating an objective fact. Your father didn't pay us to watch you sit in a wheelchair forever. The words were like a red-hot needle, stabbing straight into the most sensitive part of Willow's pride. She jerked her head up. Tears mixed with sweat streaked down her pale face, but her eyes, now like poison-dipped blades, pierced directly into me. Money, always money, you money-grubbing dogs. She screamed, completely losing control. Suddenly, she raised the one arm that could still move a little and, using all her strength, lunged toward the arm I had placed in front of her. Her sharp nails instantly tore through the thin cotton sleeve of my shirt, digging deep into my flesh. A sharp pain shot through me. My brow tightened almost imperceptibly, but my body didn't move an inch. I remained firmly between her and the therapist. There wasn't the slightest ripple in my gaze as I calmly met her eyes, blazing with mad hatred. You've scratched me, Miss Liu. I stated it flatly, as though it had nothing to do with me at all. But that doesn't change the fact that you need to complete your rehabilitation. Today's training quota must be finished. My near-cruel composure finally pushed her over the edge, and at the same time drained what little strength she had left. Like a punctured balloon, her body collapsed back into the chair. She gasped for breath as tears poured out soundlessly. The rage was gone, leaving only boundless despair and grievance. She looked at no one. Her eyes were locked on her unresponsive legs, her shoulders shaking violently. The therapist glanced awkwardly and sympathetically at the bloody scratch marks now seeping on my arm. I simply gave him a small nod, signaling him to continue. After a brief hesitation, the therapist carefully reached out again. The rest of the session continued amid suffocating silence and occasional, suppressed moans of pain. I remained standing one step away from Willow's side the entire time, like a silent guard, and also like a merciless overseer. Sweat soaked through the back of my shirt. Every small movement sent waves of stinging pain from the wound on my arm. Yet from beginning to end, the expression on my face never changed. Chapter 5. Days flowed by in this silent standoff and cold transaction, slow and viscous, like thick syrup. 3 months passed. The towering wall Willow had built from anger and despair seemed, under my day after day, rain or shine persistence, to have been worn through by steady drops of water, opened by a few almost imperceptible cracks. She no longer screamed and smashed things every time she saw me, though her gaze remained icy and her words still sharp with sarcasm. At the very least, that tightly shut bedroom door would occasionally be left ajar when I appeared carrying breakfast or lunch. She began allowing me to stay in her room a little longer. Most of the time, she stared blankly out the window while I quietly tidied the room or flipped through the worn, second-hand professional books I brought with me, texts on neurological recovery and muscle rehabilitation, their margins crammed full of dense handwritten notes. The change happened after one entirely ordinary rehab session. With the therapist's assistance and the support of the parallel bars, Willow was practicing weight shifting while standing. It was an exercise she had done countless times, each attempt accompanied by intense pain and deep psychological resistance. This time, as the therapist carefully guided her to shift her weight from her left leg to her right, a sudden, violent spasm seized her powerless right leg without warning. Ugh! She cried out in pain. Her body instantly lost balance and pitched uncontrollably toward the cold, hard floor. Terror clutched her. Was she going to fall again? Was she going to collapse like a useless sack, sprawled on the ground, waiting for others to haul her up with pity? Just as she closed her eyes in despair, bracing for the familiar impact and humiliation, a steady force suddenly caught her tilting body from the side. It was George. He had never been far from her, always at a measured distance, like a silent shadow. The moment her body tipped, I lunged forward with a predator's speed, my arm slipping firmly beneath her armpit and across her back, taking the full weight of her fall head-on. Her cheek slammed hard into my chest, narrow, but unexpectedly solid. A faint, clean scent of soap mixed with the natural warmth unique to a young man instantly filled her senses, replacing the usual smell of disinfectant that clung to the rehab room. By instinct alone, driven by the urge to survive, her hand clutched tightly at the fabric of my sleeve, gripping until her knuckles turned white. Time seemed to freeze for a single second. The anticipated cold and pain never came. There was only the embrace beneath her, carrying an unexpected warmth and a sense of strength that made her feel impossibly at ease. Willow's body went rigid, stiff as stone. She could clearly hear the steady heartbeat coming from my chest above her, thump, 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 regular and powerful. She could also feel the muscles in the arm supporting her tense and unyielding, as if her weight were no heavier than a feather. The therapist was startled as well and rushed forward to help steady her. "It's all right, you're fine." My voice sounded above her head, still calm and even, betraying no emotion. I carefully adjusted my position to make sure she could stand securely, then slowly, unobtrusively, released my hold. The entire process was quick and controlled, without a single unnecessary touch. Once she had steadied herself, Willow immediately yanked her arm away from the therapist as if burned, lowering her head as her long, wavy hair fell forward, hiding cheeks that had suddenly flushed red. She didn't dare look at me. Her heart raced wildly in her chest, not from pain, but from a strange panic born of being protected, and from a faint, secret sense of safety she didn't even want to acknowledge. I can do it myself." Her voice trembled slightly, stubbornly force steady, as both hands gripped the parallel bars, her knuckles widening once more. The therapist let out a breath of relief, his gaze toward me now tinged with admiration. I simply stepped back to my original position, as if the heart-stopping moment had never occurred. I raised my hand and lightly smoothed the sleeve Willow had wrinkled with her grip, the motion natural and casual, as though brushing away a speck of dust. Only Willow knew that. In the instant she had grabbed my arm, through the thin fabric, she seemed to have felt something beneath. The sensation was, as if, under the cloth, there were faintly raised lines, healed scars etched into skin. She didn't dare think further. All she knew was that the warmth and lingering touch at her fingertips carried a strange, prickling sensation that refused to fade. Chapter 6. On a morning in the 5th month, the sky was just beginning to lighten. Willow's internal clock had always been precise. As soon as the first traces of dawn brushed the window frames, she opened her eyes. The room was silent, broken only by the occasional crisp chirping of early birds outside. After months of rehabilitation and my almost harsh supervision, her legs were still weak and unreliable, but that utterly hopeless numbness, the sense of having no control at all, seemed to have loosened, if only by an almost imperceptible degree. An indescribable impulse seized her without warning, a mixture of longing and fear. She wanted to stand up, right now, not leaning on parallel bars, not under the watchful eyes of a therapist or George. She wanted to try, alone, quietly. Once the thought took root, it spread like wildfire, impossible to suppress. She drew in a deep breath and gripped the armrests of her wheelchair tightly, her knuckles widening with effort. Summoning every ounce of strength she had, she tried to lift her upper body and shift her weight onto those legs that had been dormant for far too long, legs doctors had all but declared hopeless. Her core engaged, her hips struggled to rise off the seat. A tearing, searing ache instantly shot from her lower spine down into her thighs. Her knees felt like they were filled with lead. The muscles in her calves trembled uselessly, refusing to obey. Cold sweat soaked her bangs and the thin fabric of her nightwear across her back. She had barely lifted herself a few centimeters from the seat when her body suddenly sank. She was about to collapse back down awkwardly, perhaps even tipping the wheelchair over. At that critical moment, a warm, powerful hand planted itself firmly against her lower back. Another arm, solid as stone, braced across her front, forming an unshakable support. Only then did she realize that George had somehow appeared beside her wheelchair without making a sound. I had just rushed back from campus, still carrying the faint chill of the early morning air. The wind had left my fringe slightly disheveled, and my breathing was faintly hurried. "Don't rush." To her, George's voice sounded especially deep in the quiet morning, carrying a strange, calming strength. "Take it slow. Use your core. Yes, like that. Hold it steady." My palm supported her trembling body without wavering, my arm giving her a firm point of leverage. That powerful, unquestionable support seemed to pour directly into Willow's body, which was on the verge of collapse. She clenched her teeth and, borrowing that strength, took a sharp breath and pushed. A miracle happened. Her feet, those feet that had effectively been given a death sentence, touched the soft carpet, trembling, barely managing to bear weight. Her knees shook violently, her calves spasmed uncontrollably, and her body swayed like a reed in a storm, completely dependent on my arm to keep from falling. But she was standing, not with equipment, not being forcibly held up by others, By her own will, her own strength, her feet were on the ground. Willow's pupils dilated sharply as overwhelming shock and joy crashed over her like a tidal wave. She even forgot to breathe, forgot the pain and trembling in her body, staring in disbelief at the tips of her feet planted on the carpet. A burning heat surged into her eyes, her vision blurring instantly. Instinctively, she grabbed the arm I had braced in front of her. She gripped it so hard her nails nearly dug into my flesh, as if it were the only lifeline she had. I held her steady, feeling her body shake and the small hand clutching my arm, cold, yet desperate with effort. I lowered my gaze, looking at the top of her head trembling from exertion and emotion, looking at those pale ankles finally bearing her weight again. In my deep, usually placid eyes, the faintest ripple finally passed, like a small stone dropped into an icy lake. She held that independent standing posture for less than 10 seconds. Then her strength vanished all at once. Her legs gave out, and her body began to slide downward uncontrollably. I was ready. My arm tightened, and almost half carrying her, I gently lowered her back into the wheelchair. The moment she sat down, Willow snapped her head up. Her face still bore tear tracks, the flush left behind after the rush of joy, and a powerful, aching need for confirmation. She forgot the cold employer-employee boundary between us, forgot her usual barbs and defenses. She just looked at me instinctively, urgently. Did you see that? Her voice trembled with disbelief, her eyes impossibly bright. I just stood up, didn't I? I did it myself. You saw it, didn't you? I withdrew my hand and straightened, meeting Willow's eyes, filled with shock, joy, and fragile hope. I nodded silently. No smile, no exaggerated praise, only a near-ruthless calm and certainty. Yes, I answered quietly. The word wasn't loud, but it fell into Willow Lu's surging heart like a stone. I saw it. So this isn't a miracle, Miss Lu. It's something you earned yourself. I turned and walked to the window, pulling open the heavy curtains with a sharp swish. Bright, hopeful morning light poured in unobstructed, instantly dispelling the gloom in the room. It illuminated the complex expression on Willow's face, tears mixed with disbelief and a fragile smile, and the faint spark rekindled in her eyes. The weather's good today. She saw George standing with his back to the light, his outline slightly blurred, his voice as steady and even as ever. After rehab, if you still have the strength, we can go outside for a walk. Chapter 7. The chill of early winter had quietly seeped into every corner of the city. Beyond the rehabilitation room's massive floor-to-ceiling windows, the sky was a dull, leaden gray. A few sparse snowflakes drifted lazily down, melting before they could even touch the ground. Wearing thick thermal socks, Willow stood between the therapist and me, one on each side, under close protection. Both hands clutched the parallel bars tightly as she cautiously attempted to take her third independent step. Fine beads of sweat dotted her forehead, her breathing slightly rapid, yet her eyes were intensely focused, carrying an almost reverent determination. Every tiny movement was like an arduous journey. Just then, Assistant Vargas appeared at the doorway of the rehab room. The complex, hard-to-read expression on his face broke the concentrated, tense atmosphere inside. Miss. Vargas spoke softly, but his words reached Willow clearly. There's a visitor. Mr. Makoto. He says he's just returned from abroad. Clang. A harsh metallic crash rang out abruptly. Willow looked as if she'd been struck by an invisible bolt of lightning. Her body stiffened violently, and the fingers gripping the parallel bars instantly lost all strength. She lost her balance and lurched heavily to the side. Careful. The therapist cried out, rushing to catch her, but I was faster. Almost on instinct, I stepped forward, my arm firmly supporting Willow's tilting upper body, stopping her from falling. I could clearly feel it. The body beneath my hand was trembling violently, frighteningly cold. At the sound of that name, all the color drained from Willow's face, leaving it paper white. Her eyes were locked on the doorway. In the depths of her pupils, a burst of unbelievable joy flared, only to be swallowed almost instantly by deeper confusion, chaos, and a suffocating kind of pain. Makoto. Her lips trembled, her voice so light it was like a wisp of smoke about to vanish. Yes, miss. Mr. Makoto is downstairs in the living room right now. Vargas confirmed. Willow sucked in a sharp breath, like someone finally breaking the surface after nearly drowning. She didn't care that she had almost fallen, didn't care that the therapist and I were still supporting her. She grabbed the armrests of her wheelchair and shouted sharply, her voice quivering with excitement. Take me down, now, push me downstairs. I looked at her in silence. In those eyes filled with chaotic light, there was no longer even the slightest trace of me. I released my grip and stepped back, yielding control of the wheelchair to Vargas, who had already hurried forward. He pushed the wheelchair away quickly and smoothly, leaving the rehabilitation room. Seated in the chair, Willow leaned forward slightly, hands gripping the armrests tightly. Her jet-black hair swayed faintly with the rapid movement. She looked like a bow drawn to its limit, taut with urgency and a reckless, all-or-nothing rush forward. The rehab room fell silent at once, leaving only the sparse snowflakes drifting outside the window and the therapist's helpless sigh. I stood where I was, watching the wheelchair disappear at the end of the corridor, my expression unchanged. I lowered my head and looked at the hand that had just supported Willow in my palm. It seemed her violent trembling and icy coldness still lingered. Slowly, I clenched my fist. A faint click sounded from my tightening knuckles. Chapter 8. The heating in the living room was turned up high. The air was saturated with the rich, mellow aroma of premium cigars, utterly at odds with the lingering scent of disinfectant clinging to Willow from the rehabilitation room. A massive crystal chandelier spilled dazzling yet icy light across the space. When Vargas pushed Willow into the center of the living room, she immediately saw the tall figure standing with his back to her by the floor-to-ceiling window. A perfectly tailored dark gray cashmere coat outlined broad shoulders and a narrow waist. His hair was meticulously styled, even from behind. He radiated the polished aura of an elite returned after a long absence. At the sound of the wheelchair, the men slowly turned around. It was Makoto. That handsome face which had appeared countless times in Willow's girlish daydreams seemed to have been further sharpened by time. Deep-set eyes, a high-bridged nose, and a smile at the corner of his lips that was perfectly calibrated, tinged with tenderness and heartache. His gaze settled on Willow, especially on her legs covered by a blanket. His thick brows instantly knitted together, his eyes overflowing with a pain so intense it seemed impossible to dissolve. And devotion. Willow. His voice was low and magnetic, carrying a faint, deliberate hoarseness, as though suppressing overwhelming emotion. He took several quick steps forward and dropped to one knee in front of Willow's wheelchair, assuming a posture of absolute equality, almost reverence, as he met her eyes. The gesture was laden with deliberate gentleness and pity. "Willow, I'm back." He reached out, as if to touch the hand resting on her legs, then stopped midway, holding himself back with careful restraint. "I'm sorry for leaving you alone to endure so much pain for so long." Willow's body stiffened completely the moment he knelt down. 5 years, a full 5 years, no word, no trace, gone without a shadow, right when she had been at her most desperate, when she needed someone to rely on the most. Countless nights of resentment, confusion, relentless self-doubt, and bone-deep agony, all of it. In this moment, under his gaze filled with regret and sorrow, within that single word sorry, collapsed like a fragile dam giving way. Scalding tears burst forth instantly, flooding out of her eyes and streaming down her pale cheeks. She bit down hard on her lower lip, unwilling to let herself sob aloud, yet her shoulders shook violently beyond her control. 1,000 unspoken words clogged her throat, finally breaking out as a single, choked sob filled with unbearable grievance. Where did you go? Why did you leave back then? Why was there no word at all?" Her questions were shattered, each word soaked through with tears. Makoto's face filled, right on cue, with profound pain and self-reproach. He lowered his lashes slightly when he looked up again. His deep eyes brimmed with heartbreaking sincerity and a resolve bordering on the tragic. "Willow, you have every right to blame me, to hate me." His voice carried a heavy ache. "Back then, when I found out about your accident, I was completely lost. Seeing you lying in that hospital bed, so pale, so fragile, and the doctor said your legs." He shook his head in anguish, as if unable to bear the memory. "I hated my own helplessness, hated that I couldn't do anything for you. At the time, the medical care here. I felt hope was almost non-existent." He drew in a deep breath, as though making an enormous decision. His gaze sharpened again, burning with conviction as it locked onto Willow's tear-filled eyes. "So I left. I didn't say goodbye because I didn't dare look you in the eye. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to leave, and even more afraid you'd see how powerless I was. I went to the United States. Willow, I studied like my life depended on it. I got into the best medical school, trained under the world's top neurosurgeons and rehabilitation specialists. 5 years, 5 full years, I never allowed myself a single moment of slack. The only thing that kept me going through all the loneliness and hardship was one thought: I would learn the best techniques, come back, and heal you myself. I would make you stand again, just like before." He reached out again. This time, he firmly yet gently clasped Willow's cold, trembling hand. His palm was warm and strong. "Willow, forgive me for leaving without a word, forgive my selfishness. I just wanted so badly to give you a future." His low voice carried a dangerously persuasive power, each word striking directly at the weakest defenses of Willow's heart. "I'm back now, with the best skills and hope. This time, let me stay with you, take care of you, until you're completely recovered, all right?" The living room fell utterly silent. Only Willow's suppressed sobs could be heard, along with the faint crackling of firewood burning in the fireplace. The crystal chandelier cast a clear light over Makoto's face, etched with devotion and unwavering resolve. Willow stared at him blankly, tears blurring her vision, her heart pounding and contracting wildly in her chest. 5 years of pent-up grievance and resentment seemed pale and powerless before this impassioned confession of leaving for love, returning accomplished. A massive surge of warmth, of something lost and suddenly regained, along with a near-dizzying wave of emotion, swallowed her whole. She squeezed Makoto's hand tightly in return and nodded hard, tears pouring even more fiercely, as if she had seized the only piece of driftwood while drowning, or like a lost ship finally spotting the beam of a lighthouse. Standing in the shadowed corner of the living room, I was like a completely forgotten backdrop. I watched the moving reunion scene in silence, watched the hope and dependence rekindle on Willow's tear-streaked face. My expression never changed, calm as a bottomless, ancient well. Only the hand tucked into my pocket curled soundlessly tighter, fingernails digging deep into my palm. Chapter 9. Dinner unfolded in an eerie, heavy silence. The enormous dining table was laden with exquisite dishes, yet the only sounds were the occasional, faint clink of cutlery against fine bone china. Pablo sat at the head of the table, his expression dark. His sharp gaze swept across Makoto, who was attentively serving Willow food from across the table, then drifted to me, quietly seated in a corner, head lowered, eating only what was in front of me, before finally settling on his daughter. Willow's face was still pale, yet now animated by a certain revived glow that alone made Pablo's brow knit even tighter. Willow was clearly still immersed in the afternoon's emotional upheaval and the joy of something thought lost and suddenly regained. She ate very little. Most of the time she kept her head lowered, occasionally flicking a quick glance at Makoto beside her as he spoke to her softly. Each time, a faint, unnatural blush rose to her cheeks, and her fingers twisted the edge of her napkin without realizing it. Dinner ended hastily. Willow seemed eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere, and even more eager to be alone with the long-lost Makoto. She murmured softly to Pablo, "Dad, I'm tired," then signaled for Assistant Vargas to wheel her back to her room. Soon, only Pablo and I remained in the living room. The servants cleared away the dishes in silence. Pablo leaned back into the broad leather sofa, a lit cigar held between his fingers. He didn't smoke it, merely let the thin blue smoke curl upward. His sharp gaze fell on me like a tangible searchlight. "George." Pablo's voice was low, carrying the pressure of someone long accustomed to authority. "That Makoto, what do you think of him?" I raised my eyes and met Pablo's scrutiny calmly. I was silent for a few seconds, either choosing my words, or weighing something internally. Then I spoke. My voice was as steady and even as ever, devoid of personal emotion. "Mr. Liu, I was hired to take care of Miss Liu's rehabilitation and daily life. My responsibility is to fulfill the duties outlined in the contract." I paused briefly, then added, "As for Miss Liu's private relationships, they fall outside my scope of responsibility. I'm not in a position to offer an opinion." The answer was watertight, professional to the point of cold detachment. It demonstrated respect for the employer's privacy while drawing a clear boundary between myself and the core affairs of the Liu family. Pablo stared at me for a long time, his expression complicated. There was scrutiny, probing, and perhaps a trace of disappointment that was hard to detect. In the end, he slowly exhaled a ring of smoke and waved his hand. "That's enough. Go get some rest." I inclined my head slightly, turned, and walked away with steady steps, leaving behind the hall steeped in the expensive scent of cigars and an unspoken haze of tension. Chapter 10. Late at night, the villa sank into sleep. Only a few dim wall lamps were lit along the corridor, casting long, wavering shadows. Willow's bedroom door was pushed open softly. She hadn't turned on the main light. The room was illuminated only by the faint glow of a small crystal table lamp on the vanity. She sat in her wheelchair with her back to the door. In front of her lay a small, dark blue velvet jewelry box. It was open and empty. Hearing the door, she slowly turned around. The flush of excitement and vulnerability from the afternoon had completely faded. What remained on her face was an almost indifferent calm, and a sense of distance born of a decision finally made. Her gaze passed through the dim light and settled on the silent figure at the doorway. "George, you're here." Her voice was light, carrying no warmth. I didn't step inside. I remained at the boundary between light and shadow in the doorway, like a silent silhouette. Willow picked up an envelope resting on the vanity. It was thin, yet clearly held something of weight. She maneuvered her wheelchair forward and extended the envelope toward me. "Take it." Her tone was crisp and decisive, carrying the finality of cutting something cleanly away. "There's 1 million inside, paid in advance, your remaining compensation, and an additional bonus." My eyes fell on the thin envelope, but I didn't take it immediately. "My legs are recovering better than expected." Willow avoided my gaze, her eyes dropping to the knees covered by the blanket as she spoke flatly, as if stating a fact. "The doctor said that at this pace, as long as I keep up rehabilitation, a full recovery of walking ability is only a matter of time. And now, Makoto is back." At the mention of his name, her voice paused almost imperceptibly, as though drawing strength from it. He spent 5 years abroad studying the top rehabilitation medicine in the world. He'll take over my continued treatment and care. She finally looked up at me. The lamplight flickered in her eyes, yet reflected no warmth, only a frozen distance and a certainty that felt almost like a favor being bestowed. So, George, you did well. My father's money wasn't wasted on you. The corners of her mouth even lifted into an extremely faint curve, like the ease that comes after completing a transaction. But now, your task is finished. Makoto will be more professional than you, and more dedicated. You'll leave tomorrow morning. The crystal chandelier in the living room seemed to spin above my head, scattering countless cold, brilliant fragments of light. My gaze finally moved away from the empty dark blue jewelry box and fell on the envelope Willow was holding out. Such thin paper, yet it seemed to carry the weight of an ending. I remained silent. Time stretched, thickened, froze. The room held only Willow's slightly uneven breathing and the distant sound of wind outside the window. A few seconds later, I slowly raised my hand. My movement was steady, without the slightest tremor. My fingertips touched the smooth surface of the envelope, carrying a strangely cold sensation. I took it. My fingers closed around it, gripping that light yet heavy ending in my palm. All right, I spoke at last. My voice was calm, like stagnant water, revealing no emotion at all. No questioning, no attachment, not even a trace of surprise. That overly decisive response caused all the prepared lines Willow had held in reserve, things like, "Take the money and live well," or, "Thank you for everything you've done," to jam abruptly in her throat. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. In the end, she said nothing. She only watched as I held the envelope, turned around, and walked toward the door without hesitation. That figure remained upright, step steady, without the slightest pause, and without once looking back. The door closed softly behind me with a sound so faint it was almost inaudible, completely sealing off two separate worlds. Willow sat in her wheelchair, still holding the posture of handing out the envelope, unmoving for a long time. The small crystal lamp on the vanity seemed to dim slightly. A vast, nameless emptiness surged up like an icy tide without warning, instantly drowning the smug sense of ease and certainty she'd felt just moments before. She subconsciously lifted a hand to her chest. It felt as though that silently closing door had pinched her heart on the way shut. Chapter 11. At 3 in the morning, the city was still asleep. I had pitifully little luggage, one half-worn suitcase and an overstuffed hiking backpack. Those were the only traces of my brief stay in this luxurious villa. I moved soundlessly through the empty, deathly quiet corridors and down the spiral staircase. The vast living room lay in complete darkness. Only the never-sleeping neon glow from the city outside seeped through the windows, casting vague, blurred shadows across the floor. I reached the foyer without turning on the lights and changed my shoes by that faint glow. My gaze swept the space one last time, this room saturated with expense and coldness, without the slightest trace of attachment. I opened the door. The early winter wind, sharp and biting, rushed in at once, ruffling the loose strands of hair on my forehead. Outside, the night was thick as ink. A ride-hailing car waited quietly by the curb, its headlights cutting two faint beams through the darkness. Dragging my luggage, I walked briskly down the steps, the cold air instantly wrapping around my lightly clad body. The driver was a taciturn middle-aged man. Seeing me approach, he efficiently got out and opened the trunk for me. "South Station," I said. My voice was clear and calm in the cold night. "Got it," he replied, starting the engine. The black sedan glided silently into the empty pre-dawn streets, leaving behind that brightly lit yet utterly warmthless mansion, and all the people and stories inside it, swiftly swallowed by the heavy darkness. The cityscape outside the window slid backward at speed. Streetlights flickered on and off across my face. I leaned back against the seat, closed my eyes, and took a deep breath of air tinged with exhaust fumes and cold. Then I pulled out my phone. The screen's glow was harsh in the darkness. I opened the banking app and logged in, my fingers moving swiftly across the screen. A few seconds later, a new message notification appeared clearly. XX Bank, your account ending in XX received a transfer of 1 million renminbi. 00 at 3:15 on X/X. Current balance, 3,021,567 renminbi. 38. My eyes lingered on the long string of numbers for a long time. The cold light of the screen reflected in my equally cold pupils. There was no exhilaration, no excitement, only a vast, dust-settling calm, and an indescribable sense of collapse that came from finally setting down a heavy burden. I tugged faintly at the corner of my mouth, forming a silent, barely perceptible curve. Was it mockery, or release? I turned off the screen, leaned my head fully back against the icy headrest, and closed my eyes. At last, it was over. Chapter 12. Dawn broke faintly as the high-speed train shot forward like a silver arrow, slicing through the thin mist shrouding the plains, racing toward the warm south. I sat by the window, watching the scenery outside rush past, gradually shifting from bleak gray-yellow desolation to soft greens bursting with life. The cold glass sealed out the roaring wind. Inside the carriage, it was warm and quiet. I took out my phone again. This time, the screen no longer showed the glaring balance of a banking app, but the interface of a housing rental platform. My fingers scrolled as my eyes focused intently on the listings. Sea view, courtyard, quiet, move-in ready. I entered each keyword in turn. Finally, my finger stopped on one photograph. It showed a small courtyard nestled between mountain and sea. A 2-story white-walled house with clean, simple lines, large floor-to-ceiling windows, and a small viewing deck paved with weather-treated wood. At the edge of the deck, several pots of greenery stretched their leaves in the morning light. Beyond the deck lay the boundless blue sea. Waves gently lapped against nearby rocks, rolling up fine sprays of white foam. In the corner of the photo, a small wooden sign swayed slightly in the sea breeze. Written on it in dark blue paint was a single phrase, "Not seen." My gaze rested on that sign for a moment. Then I tapped the button marked, "Contact Landlord." Chapter 13. 1 month later, a small southern seaside town. The sea breeze, carrying its familiar salty tang and dampness, swept across the small viewing deck of Unseen Inn. The rattan table and chairs on the deck were spotless. I had just seen off a young couple who had come for a weekend getaway and turned back toward the front desk. My phone screen lit up. It was an unfamiliar local number. I answered casually. "Hello, this is Unseen Inn." There was a 2-second silence on the other end. Then a woman's voice burst out, ragged with frantic breathing and overwhelming grievance. Every word trembling. "George, it's me, Willow. Where are you? That bastard, Makoto, he's a liar. A complete liar. He's not some elite medical graduate at all. He couldn't survive overseas. And he's already married. He came back just to scam my dad out of money. I kicked him out. George. I need you. Only you can help me. Where are you? Tell me where you are." I held the phone and listened in silence. The voice on the other end was sharp and chaotic, filled with rage after betrayal, collapse, and a drowning kind of helplessness. I could picture it clearly. Willow sitting in her wheelchair, face pale, eyes frantic, like a small animal driven into a corner. Only when her voice grew hoarse and broken from sobbing did I finally speak. My words traveled through the line, calm as a stone dropped into deep water, stirring not the slightest ripple. "Miss Liu." I used that long unspoken form of address with precision. "First of all, congratulations on seeing through the scam and protecting your own interests." The line went instantly quiet, leaving only a suppressed, disbelieving intake of breath. My voice continued, steady and even, devoid of warmth, carrying a cold distance that pushed everything away. "Second, regarding your continued rehabilitation, I suggest you consult a more professional medical institution or hire a licensed rehabilitation specialist. There are plenty of patient and capable therapists in the world. I am not the only one. With the Liu family's resources, finding someone more qualified and more professional should not be difficult." I paused, clearly hearing the sudden, heavier, shattered breathing on the other end. Finally, my gaze drifted beyond the deck to the boundless blue sea outside, its surface glittering under the sunlight. A faint trace of weariness slipped into my voice. "My task ended long ago. Payment rendered. Contract fulfilled. We owe each other nothing. Your life has nothing to do with me. Please don't contact me again." Without waiting for any response, I decisively pressed the end call button. Beep, beep, beep. The busy tone sounded. I set the phone down casually on the wooden counter of the front desk. The screen went dark. I picked up a clean cloth and began wiping the smooth countertop unhurriedly, my movements careful and focused. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a small, quiet patch of shadow beneath my lowered lashes. The sea breeze remained gentle, carrying with it the salty, liberating scent of freedom. Chapter 14. The busy tone after the call ended was like an icy needle, stabbing again and again into Willow's eardrums, and even deeper into her chaotic mind. She gripped her phone so tightly her knuckles turned pale blue, her body trembling uncontrollably in the oversized wheelchair. A massive wave of humiliation surged up like a tsunami, instantly drowning out the anger and grievance of being deceived. How could George be so calm, so cold, as if he were discussing some irrelevant, discarded object? Payment rendered. Contract fulfilled. Your life has nothing to do with me. His emotionless voice, those icy words, replayed in her mind over and over again. Every syllable was like a poison-tipped ice spike, shredding her self-righteous sense of needing him and pulling him back into tatters. A violent impulse seized her. "Ah!" A shrill scream tore from her throat, filled with collapsing despair and nowhere to go rage. She flung her arm up and, using all her strength, hurled the brand new, outrageously expensive phone in her hand straight at the mirror-polished wall. Bang! A deafening crash. The solid phone shattered instantly, exploding into fragments. Shards of the screen burst outward like ice crystals, scattering across the floor in ruin. The noise drew Assistant Vargas and the servants rushing in. What they saw was a room strewn with debris, and Willow in her wheelchair, breathing hard like a wounded beast, tears streaming down her face, her eyes terrifyingly hollow. "Miss." She didn't respond to their calls. She stared fixedly at the glittering fragments on the floor, the remains of the phone that had represented her last fragile link to the outside world. Her chest heaved violently. After a long time, she slowly raised her head. Tear tracks still marked her face, but her eyes were frighteningly empty. Her voice was hoarse, like sandpaper scraping stone. "Go, find me new rehab therapists. The best, the most expensive, immediately." The days that followed turned the Liu family villa into a battlefield for rehabilitation specialists. One so-called top expert after another, gold medal therapists, were hired at staggering prices. They arrived in impeccably pressed white coats, carrying expensive equipment cases, wearing professionally gentle smiles and offering nearly identical words of encouragement. Willow sat in the rehab chair like a puppet without a soul. She no longer screamed, no longer cursed. She didn't even cry. She simply looked at them with those terrifyingly empty eyes. "Miss Liu, relax." "Yes, that's right. Let's take it slowly." "Excellent. Today's condition is very good. Hold that angle. Pain is normal. Bear with it, it'll pass soon." Their movements were standard, precise, textbook perfect. They supported her arms, bent her knees, guided her through each prescribed rehabilitation exercise. Every touch was separated by sterile gloves. Every instruction maintained a carefully measured distance. Their eyes were focused, but that focus rested only on her limbs, on the numbers displayed by nearby instruments. It never truly landed on her lifeless eyes. No one caught her falling weight with their own body when pain made her muscles spasm and give out. No one appeared silently and swiftly in the dead of night, when leg cramps twisted her into a tight knot and she bit through her lip without making a sound, easing the agony with warm hands and just the right pressure. And no one, emerged like a silent shadow at the critical moment when she struggled to stand alone in the early morning, about to fall, offering an unquestionable support strong enough to hold back the entire world. These therapists did nothing wrong. Their methods were correct, their procedures standardized, their words gentle. They were simply doing their jobs that paid extraordinarily well. They followed protocol, worked meticulously, and left on time. Their concern was itemized on a price list. Their patients carried an expensive tag. Willow cooperated like a marionette. She could feel her knees slowly regaining the sensation of bending, her calves twitching faintly under electrical stimulation. Her physical indicators were improving, gradually, but her heart sank deeper and deeper into a bottomless ice abyss, growing colder, emptier by the day. She began suffering from sleepless nights. In the darkness, the images she had tried so hard to forget surged back uncontrollably. She remembered pouring scalding soup onto his arm, and how he silently wiped it off and went back to the kitchen to serve another bowl. She remembered hurling the ugliest insults at him, while he simply stood a few steps away, calm and unmoving, waiting for her to finish venting before handing her a cup of warm water. She remembered him poring over thick rehabilitation books crammed with notes, the desk lamp outlining an intensely focused profile. She remembered the morning she first stood up on her own, him standing against the light, saying calmly, "I saw it. So this isn't a miracle, Miss Liu. It's something you earned yourself." Those scenes were so vivid, so alive, carrying a suffocating weight as they crushed her hollow heart again and again. Another rehab session ended. The new therapist packed up the equipment, offered a professional smile, and left. The spacious rehabilitation room once again held only Willow, and the dusk outside the window, slowly darkening. She sat in her wheelchair, unmoving. Her gaze fell on her feet, clad in specialized rehabilitation shoes. The last glow of sunset stretched long, twisted shadows across the floor through the massive windows. Suddenly, a phone rang, shattering the silence. It was Pablo. Chapter 15. Willow stared at the name flashing on the screen. Only after a long while did she mechanically slide to answer. "Hello, Dad." Her voice was dry and hoarse. There was a brief silence on the other end before Pablo spoke, his voice carrying fatigue and a trace of cautious probing. "Willow, how's the rehab, the new therapist?" Willow's gaze remained hollow, fixed on the last sliver of sunset sinking beneath the horizon outside the window. Her voice drifted like smoke. "They're all the same, Dad, all the same." Another silence followed. Pablo seemed to sigh. "The one who wasn't the same is the one you drove away yourself. Willow, all your father can give you is money. I can only help you find professionals. But a person's heart, that's not something I can buy." Willow's fingers clenched tightly around the phone. Pablo's words were like a dull blade, slowly and heavily cutting open the truth she had been desperately avoiding. "A person's heart? Dad, what are you talking about? He was just doing it for the money." Her voice shot up, sharp and panicked, filled with denial after being exposed. There was a brief pause on the line. When Pablo spoke again, his tone held a calm that seemed to see straight through everything. "Someone who's only doing it for the money wouldn't really leave the moment you told him to get lost and never look back." He paused, each word striking precisely against Willow's taut nerves. Someone who's only doing it for the money wouldn't calmly congratulate you after you drove him away and threw yourself into someone else's arms. Willow, think carefully. What you felt for him, was it really just employer and employee? Or is it that you'd already fallen for him, only you refused to admit it? Boom. Pablo's words exploded like a thunderbolt in the chaotic lake of her mind. Like him. I like George. That taciturn man, who only worked for money, who calmly handed her a check at her most humiliating moment, who coldly rejected her when she tried to pull him back, that poor student. Impossible. As if burned, Willow abruptly hung up the call. The phone slipped from her trembling hand and fell onto the carpet with a dull thud. A crushing sense of absurdity, and the shame of having her disguise ripped away, exposed under broad daylight, engulfed her instantly. She sat in her wheelchair, chest heaving violently, her face flushing and paling by turns. Her father's words echoed in her ears like a curse. Someone who's only doing it for the money wouldn't really leave the moment you told him to get lost. Someone who's only doing it for the money wouldn't calmly congratulate you after you drove him away and chose someone else. You'd already fallen for him, only you refused to admit it. No. That's not it. How could she possibly like someone like him? Someone whose eyes held nothing but money, who had no dignity, who could endure all her humiliation. The one she liked, the one she'd always liked, was someone like Makoto. Handsome, dazzling, deeply affectionate, a liar. That realization struck her heart like an icy dagger. Agonizing pain surged with overwhelming despair, leaving her ice cold from head to toe. She bent forward sharply, both hands gripping her numb, unresponsive legs, nails digging deep into flesh as if physical pain could drown out the bloody truth being forcibly laid bare in her heart. A suppressed, broken whimper escaped her throat, like the cry of a dying animal. So that immense, unfillable emptiness she'd felt after driving him away wasn't because she'd lost a rehabilitation therapist. So the cold disgust and resistance she felt toward all those new therapists wasn't because of their skills. So those memories that kept haunting her, every one of his silent gazes, every solid support he gave her, weren't born of resentment. They were born of affection. This belated realization, steeped in irony and pain, surged like molten lava, instantly shattering all her self-deception and forced composure. She slumped in her wheelchair, her body trembling uncontrollably under the violent swing of emotion. Tears poured out in a flood. This time, it wasn't grievance, it wasn't anger, it was overwhelming regret, and a terror called loss. At last, she understood. She understood far too late. Chapter 16. In the depths of winter, the seaside town was crisp and clear, the air carrying the scent of sea salt. Sunlight poured generously onto the small viewing platform of Unseen Inn. I had just seen off a group of long-term guests and was holding a hose, rinsing down the deck. Clear water swept across the weather-treated wooden floor, splashing softly and refracting fine shards of light in the sun. A low-key yet luxurious black business car pulled up silently along the stone-paved road outside the inn's small courtyard. The car door opened. Assistant Vargas stepped out first, efficiently retrieving a folded wheelchair from the trunk, unfolding it, and positioning it beside the rear door. The rear door opened slowly. Willow wore a thick white cashmere coat, her scarf covering most of her face, leaving only a pair of eyes visible, eyes dulled slightly by long travel, yet strikingly bright and tense. With Vargas's support, she shifted with some effort into the wheelchair. From the moment she stepped out of the car, her gaze had been locked firmly on the figure standing on the platform with a hose in hand. I seemed to sense something. I turned off the tap, straightened up, and turned around. Separated by the small courtyard gate and a few meters of distance, our gazes collided abruptly in midair. Willow's heart pounded wildly in her chest, as if it were about to break through her ribs. She drew in a deep breath of cold, salty air, clenched both hands around the wheelchair's armrests, and with all her strength began to maneuver the chair, slowly, inch by inch, toward that figure. Her movements were still awkward. The wheelchair bumped lightly over the uneven stone path, producing faint rattling sounds. I stood where I was, watching her quietly. There was no expression on my face, neither surprise nor disgust, only a calm neutrality, as if I were looking at a complete stranger. The wheelchair finally came to a stop at the edge of the platform, a few steps away from me. Willow lifted her head. The thin winter sunlight illuminated her face, clearly revealing the tension, anticipation, and almost all-or-nothing courage in her eyes. She licked her dry lips. Her voice trembled faintly, yet came out clear. George. I can stand up now. She paused, as if gathering strength, or perhaps declaring something of great importance. This time, I came here on my own. I want to start over, not as employer and employee, but as Willow and George. Is that possible? Her eyes never left mine, filled with cautious probing and an intense, undisguised hope, like a drowning person staring at their last piece of driftwood. My gaze slowly moved from her tense face down to her hands gripping the wheelchair's armrests. knuckles white from effort. Then, the corner of my mouth lifted slightly. It was a very faint curve, polite, yet distant. I raised my hands and began to clap softly, one beat at a time. The sound was crisp, echoing strangely in the quiet courtyard amid the moaning sea wind, jarringly out of place. Congratulations, Miss Liu. My voice was gentle as ever, but carried an icy, impersonal politeness that kept all distance intact. Your recovery has gone well. You've achieved what you wished for. I lowered my hands and met Willow's gaze, now frozen, the light in her eyes dimming rapidly, and continued, every word clear and indifferent. But what does that have to do with me? The color drained from Willow's face in an instant. She swayed slightly in her wheelchair, as if that casually spoken "what does that have to do with me" had struck her squarely across the face. All the tension, anticipation, and all-or-nothing courage shattered under the calm, unruffled gaze that even carried a hint of detached courtesy. Overwhelming humiliation and annihilating despair surged over her like an icy tide, swallowing her whole. She opened her mouth, but it was as if something had lodged firmly in her throat. No sound came out. Only her chestnut-colored eyes, rapidly clouding with shattered tears, stared at me. They were filled with disbelief, pain, and the numb confusion of being utterly rejected. I no longer looked at her. It was as if I had merely completed a necessary, polite response. I turned around, picked up the hose leaning against the wall, and turned the tap. Whoosh! Clear water burst forth again, washing away the fine sand left behind by earlier guests. The sound of rushing water grew loud in the quiet courtyard, drowning out the moan of the sea wind, and the choked sobs coming from the wheelchair behind me. Willow sat there, like a statue suddenly stripped of all life. Assistant Vargas stood outside the courtyard gate, watching everything in silence, not stepping forward. The sunlight remained bright, the sea breeze remained gentle, yet over the small viewing platform of unseen inn, an invisible, icy barrier seemed to descend. After an unknown length of time, perhaps only minutes, perhaps as long as a century, Willow finally raised her hand, slowly and with great difficulty, to operate the wheelchair controls. The motor hummed softly as the chair turned and glided soundlessly toward the black business car waiting outside the courtyard. Her back was held straight, bearing an almost tragic stubbornness, yet unable to conceal the bone-deep frailty and vulnerability beneath. The black business car started up once more, pulled away silently along the stone road, merged into the flow of traffic on the coastal highway, and eventually disappeared from view. I turned off the tap. The rush of water stopped abruptly. The courtyard returned to stillness, leaving only the sound of waves breaking against the rocks. I stood where I was, gazing in the direction Willow had vanished. The trace of distant politeness on my face was long gone, replaced by a depthless calm. I bent down, picked up the broom leaning against the wall, and began carefully sweeping the sand that the water had gathered together on the platform. Every movement was precise and methodical, as if that brief yet intense confrontation had never happened at all. Chapter 17. Days moved forward like the tides along the coastline of the small town, calm, steady, predictable. Willow did not appear again, yet the tranquility of unseen inn was broken in a peculiar way. Every morning, just as the first rays of sunlight spilled across the viewing platform, a familiar little electric scooter would stop punctually outside the inn's courtyard. A delivery rider in a blue uniform would take an exquisitely packaged breakfast from his insulated box and bring it to the front desk. Crystal clear shrimp dumplings, plump with filling, crab roe soup dumplings bursting with rich broth, a steaming bowl of lean pork congee, generous with ingredients, and beside it, a small dish of vibrant green blanched choy sum, lightly drizzled with sesame oil. Each meal box always came with a small card, written in neat yet slightly awkward handwriting. Boss Wong. Try South City's morning tea. This place's shrimp dumplings have thin skins and great filling. Changing it up today. Nanji's lean pork congee. Heard it simmers for 4 hours. Saw you eating instant noodles on the platform yesterday. Your stomach will be ruined. You must eat breakfast. I looked at these breakfasts, never repeated, clearly selected and paired with care, and at the notes that tried hard to sound casual but couldn't hide their clumsiness and caution. In silence, I placed them into the small refrigerator beneath the front desk. I didn't take a single bite. A few days later, the fridge was packed full of untouched, delicate meals. The delivery rider's expression shifted, from cheerful enthusiasm, to hesitant concern, and finally to silent drop-offs and departures. Besides breakfast, the front desk would occasionally receive lavishly wrapped bouquets, sometimes fiery red roses, sometimes elegant champagne-colored roses, sometimes fresh, understated white lilies. The handwriting on the cards remained just as awkward. Passed by a flower shop. Thought this color matched today's weather. Red roses seem kind of tacky. Should I switch to white tomorrow? Forget it. What flowers do you like? I calmly unwrapped the bouquets and placed them, one stem at a time, into the unused glass vase in the corner of the front desk, originally meant for odds and ends. I didn't trim them. I didn't change the water. I simply let them bloom. then quickly wither and fade, petals falling into decay. When it was time to clean, I would quietly sweep the dead leaves and broken stems into the dustpan and empty them into the trash. These silent, clumsy gestures of goodwill were like stones tossed into deep water. Aside from the faintest ripple at the beginning, there was no echo at all, until one afternoon, when the sunlight was especially bright. Chapter 18. I was hanging freshly washed white bed sheets in the backyard. The sea breeze swept through, and the clean white sheets billowed like great sails, flapping in the sunlight and releasing a crisp scent mixed with detergent and sun-warmed air. A burst of unusual commotion came from the front yard, mixed with a few deliberately hushed gasps. I frowned slightly, set down the clothespin in my hand, and walked through the inn's small porch toward the front. The sight before me made my steps stop short. Willow was standing at the small gate of the inn. Standing. She wasn't in a wheelchair. She wasn't even using crutches. She stood there upright, wearing a light blue dress, its hem swaying gently in the sea breeze. Her body trembled faintly. Her face was flushed red from exertion, fine beads of sweat covering her forehead. Both hands were clenched tightly into fists at her sides, her knuckles pale with strain. It was obvious that standing on her own was still a fierce battle for her. Yet her gaze burned like fire. It cut straight through the onlookers, crossed the few meters between us, and locked onto me with astonishing precision the moment I stepped out. In her eyes, there was no pleading, no weakness, only an almost all-or-nothing blaze, fierce, resolute, and desperate in its determination, as if she were pouring every ounce of strength she had left, months of persistence, every clumsy attempt, every grievance endured, and the immense resolve she carried at this very moment, into that single look. Guests nearby paused to watch, murmuring softly among themselves. I stood in the shadow of the porch, looking at the figure trembling under the sunlight yet stubbornly upright, looking at the fire in her eyes that burned without regard for consequence. The calm on my face finally showed a faint, almost imperceptible crack. Chapter 19. Time slid by once more in a silent tug-of-war, 2 whole months gone. Unseen and seemed to have returned to its usual calm. After Willow's heart-stopping attempt to stand and win him back, there were no further grand gestures. The withered bouquets in the unused glass vase at the front desk were cleared away, and no new flowers ever appeared. The refrigerator was finally emptied as well. No more piles of cold, untouched breakfasts. Just when I had almost convinced myself that this wordless pursuit had finally reached its end, a warm spring evening arrived. The sea breeze carried a gentle warmth as it brushed across the viewing platform. Willow appeared at the courtyard gate once again. This time, she didn't try to stand unsupported, and she wasn't in a wheelchair. She leaned on a cane, sleek, minimal in design, and moved into the courtyard step by step, slowly and with immense effort. Her movements were still awkward. Every step looked unbearably heavy. Her body swayed slightly, relying entirely on her arm and the cane to maintain balance. Fine beads of sweat quickly formed on her forehead, and her breathing grew labored from the strain. But she didn't stop. From the moment she stepped through the gate, her gaze locked firmly onto me, standing behind the front desk, apparently sorting through accounts. Under everyone's eyes, she advanced, cane tapping the ground, one step at a time, painfully slow, yet unwaveringly determined. The sound of the cane striking stone and her heavy breathing became the only background noise in the small courtyard. When she was just a few steps away from the desk, she stopped. She didn't speak. She merely panted lightly, then lifted one hand toward something she had been carefully holding against her chest the entire time. It was a large, exquisitely arranged bouquet. Champagne-colored roses bloomed in a lush cluster, accented with vivid eucalyptus leaves, fresh, radiant, and sweetly fragrant in the soft evening light. Tiny droplets of water still clung to the petals. It was obvious they had been chosen with care. Just moments ago, Willow held the bouquet with both hands. From the exertion, her arms trembled slightly, as did her body leaning on the cane. Her cheeks were flushed from the walk and the surge of emotion. Damp strands of hair clung to her smooth forehead. She lifted her head. Those chestnut-colored eyes were dazzling, catching the full glow of the setting sun, filled with unmistakable tension and an almost reverent hope. She drew in a deep breath, as if summoning every last bit of strength she had, and finally found her voice. It trembled faintly, but rang out with unmistakable clarity, echoing through the suddenly quiet courtyard. "George, the flowers, for you." Her eyes stayed locked on me, burning with her last reserve of courage, as if silently asking, "This time, did you see it? Did you see my resolve?" The few guests nearby, along with the receptionist, all held their breath, their gazes darting between the stubborn girl clutching the massive bouquet and me, standing silently behind the desk. I stopped what I was doing. Slowly, I raised my head and looked at Willow. The golden light of sunset traced her determined outline. Sweat slid down from her temple. The fire in her eyes was so intense it nearly scorched. I remained silent. Time seemed to freeze again. The sea breeze drifted gently by, carrying the rich sweetness of roses, Just as the light in Willow's eyes began to tremble under the weight of that silence, on the verge of going out, I moved. I did not reach for the bouquet, the symbol of her fervent devotion. Instead, I calmly stepped out from behind the front desk. My pace was steady. I walked up to Willow, close enough to see her eyelashes quivering with nervous tension. Then, before everyone's stunned gaze, in the molten gold of the setting sun, reflected in Willow's suddenly widened eyes, frozen in disbelief, I slowly went down on one knee. I looked up at her, my gaze deep and calm, like the darkest sea, clearly reflecting her utterly stunned face. From my pocket, I took out a small, deep blue velvet box. Click, the box opened softly. Inside lay a diamond ring, simple in design, yet dazzling in brilliance, resting on black velvet, refracting cold, radiant light in the glow of dusk. My voice rose, not loud, but clear enough to drown out the sigh of the waves and the moan of the wind, carrying an uncanny, unquestionable calm. Willow Lu. Miss Lu. I spoke her full name precisely. There was no excitement, no tenderness, only the cool certainty of a conclusion long reached. Marry me. I paused, meeting her completely frozen, blank stare, and added with absolute clarity, each word branded in place. Monthly salary, 100,000. Paid daily.